What's your name?
Julia Willebrand.
And you're a political candidate?
I'm a political candidate for the Green Party for the 6th time. I have run for State Senate, State Assembly, New York City Mayor, twice for New York State Comptroller, and now for New York City Comptroller.
Didn't step on it.
Ah, good.
Okay,
Excellent.
now what did you learn about running for political office?
What I learned that the two parties in New York State and probably in the rest of the country have set up a nice, neat duopoly. That way, one party can introduce legislation that its supporters want, and the other party will vote it down, and vice versa. And they will both only agree on things that the banksters and the developers and the rest of the corporatocracy want to happen.
And what is their notion of party discipline?
Well, party discipline is very simple. If you don't do what we tell you, we won't give you the money to keep on running.
And what about interaction between one side and the other of the aisle?
One side and the other, and
In other words, Republicans and Democrats don't reason together. It's just a party
absolutely.
game.
Well, they probably do, but that's probably
Behind closed
not
doors among the leaders.
you know, that is most likely not happening at the public level. And besides that, if we're talking about the state, don't forget those legislators up there only meet once a week, more or less, on Wednesdays. And their part-time job, which pays them $78,000 a year plus perks,
Wow.
allows them all to hold full-time jobs in law firms. The majority leader in the Senate, Sheldon Silver, made $250,000 last year working for his law firm. No doubt at part-time, just a few hours a day, right?
No, he's a senior partner in which he has the flunkies do the job and do the billing and all that.
Oh, that's possible. Yeah, you're making a suggestion that suggests that, yeah,
plausible.
but he's got to be very busy meeting with his supporters and his campaign fund people and his donors, all of whom are donating tons of money.
So lobbying is the term they use even at the state level?
Oh, yes.
But it is a polite term for bribery?
Absolutely. And our governor right now is the first proposition of the 6 propositions that are on the ballot. 2 weeks from now, you'll all be voting on them. Proposition 1 is a proposition to approve 7 more casinos in New York State. Now, casinos are an invitation for addiction and generally supported by the poorest and the lowest paid people in the state. And so he wants to have 7 more of them approved. And the law requires that a proposition be phrased in neutral terms. And when they polled and found out that a neutral term phrased proposition approving casinos wouldn't get passed, he had the Board of Elections change the wording of the proposition to say that this proposition will create jobs and improve the economy of the state. It's illegal to do that. It's supposed to be a neutral term, but New York State judge, they're also elected by their 2 parties, dismissed the case. So it's on the ballot.
No, but I heard that part and I just wanted to savor the language a little better. Now, the original language mentioned that what's going on is approving some additional casinos in the state. And the new language avoids a tip-off that we're talking casinos. It just talks about making more jobs.
Oh, no, it starts out, instead of just saying, we ask you to approve casinos, assuming that everybody in the state probably knows what a casino is, or approve 7 more of them, that's neutral. Do it or don't do it. Support it or don't support it, and do the normal thing with things like this, and go out and campaign for it if you want it. But our governor, instead of leaving the language neutral, got the Board of Elections to change the language, and now it says approve 7 casinos because they are going to improve the economy and create more jobs. That is no longer neutral language. Because where's the language that says, and yes, it will probably increase gambling addiction, which is a notorious addiction, and it will probably impact most strongly the poorest and the least able to support gambling.
So the kinds of jobs are, what kind of jobs, in fact?
Well, who knows?
Mopping the floors in the casinos.
Or, yeah, dealing or cleaning up the things. But the jobs that the state approves something like this and claims that the citizens approve it, believing it's going to create jobs, is a mistake.
But it from your ears, from your mouth to my ears, what I'm hearing is absolute proof of the corruption of the governor.
Absolutely, absolute proof of and the government is corrupted by the fact that the Constitution.
No, I didn't say the government, I said the governor.
Oh, the governor. Well, no, it's my conclusion that the governor is corrupt in this particular case because he has used his power to have the Board of Elections change something to facilitate the passage of something he has probably agreed to at the behest of casino owners, the Donald Trumps of the...
He's been bribed, lobbyists, he's been given money for his so-called campaign and whatever else to support their proposition in exchange. Now, what are some of the other dimensions of corruption of the governor? For example, he is in favor of allowing the nuclear power, like at Indian Point, to continue?
Yes.
And
Well, I think that I would prefer not to make it clear that I'm assuming. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not claiming that I have hard evidence of this. I am a citizen and a concerned citizen and a knowledgeable citizen, and I make that assumption. But that doesn't mean that I'm claiming that I have stored away written or video proof of
But
this.
Julia, for example, when I get email regularly that says, come out and demonstrate to discourage the governor to vote in favor of fracking, I'm thinking, is he really going to respond? I mean, what's going on? No, he's already bought off, or he's just auctioning off to the highest bidder on which way to go in fracking, but he doesn't really care about the real deal that fracking will ruin our wine, our farm, our water, our state.
I absolutely agree with you on that. And yes, he moderates his position when enough people are out there. So I think at the moment that he had a position of moratorium until his controlled environmental agency approved it, and that hasn't happened yet. So it's still a moratorium. But anybody with any reasonable sense would be demanding, and we are, the anti-fracking people are demanding a ban, not a moratorium. Moratorium means that tomorrow new governor comes in and end of moratorium, and that's something. I wanted to talk a little bit about the comptroller's office. I am running for New York City Comptroller, and one of the New York City Comptroller's missions, one of the major mission, is to protect the financial health of the city. And actually, John Liu, our comptroller right now, has done quite a good job in some areas. But if I were elected, I would start protecting the financial health of the city by doing the work of getting out a financial report on what the city is going to experience if they put that fracking through.
Oh,
Let's talk about the finances involved. What happens when our water system is destroyed? What happens, and
That
what
is a
does
good
that
question.
cost us financially? So, if the comptroller is responsible for protecting the financial health, and that's the word they use, of the city. That means the comptroller is in the business of estimating what things are going to cost and saying, no, this is dangerous, or yes, this is good, it will improve things. And so I would start by having a major report done on what the costs are going to be to the city of New York if the water system is destroyed by fracking upstate, even if they're not fracking in our physical, geographical boundaries.
pipe it through.
They'll be fracking. Well, I'm not even thinking about the piping aspect of it, but they will be fracking in our water. Our city fathers, more than 100 years ago, protected New York City's water by going upstate and buying the land around the reservoirs so that you couldn't drive trucks to the reservoirs, you couldn't develop around the reservoirs, you couldn't do that. Protected our water, and we have the best water. It's acknowledged we have the best water in the United
But
States.
that's been chiseled away.
Well, it's not gone yet. The point is that it's there.
But there is some development that has been allowed by different evil governors.
Uh-huh. Oh, well, you probably know more about that than I do. You want to talk about it?
No, well, I mean, I don't have any.
I know, because I
just-
don't have any. It was my understanding that they were. I know that we have our own police force that patrols it and sees that it's protected. I know that we pay taxes in all those areas, and that's one of the reasons why it's been. They were smart enough to say, okay, we'll be taxpayers, and that's one way to protect the water system. So.
Well, I will say this. I have done video in the past about the situation on Long Island for water, in which, because of Stony Brook dumping their waste straight down, that got into the drinking water for all of Long Island. That there is just like one underground reservoir of that water, and over the years the radiation that they dumped spreads out, and they can measure how it flows out. They call it a plume, and the plume moves, and eventually all the water that people drink has to be trucked in. And there are scenes of towns close to Stony
Interesting.
Brook where they have trucks, and you come by with your jug and they give you some water to drink.
And how much of that happened because the controllers are all over the place, didn't do their job of maintaining watching out for the financial health. You don't have to talk about it as a goody two-shoes thing. If you want to talk about it as money, and it costs. Every time they do something more damage to the environment and claim that it's because of jobs, it's because of corporate profits. In fact, to go backwards a little bit, back to what I started saying about John Liu, the present controller, whom I am not running against. He ran for mayor and he's not running again. Did an excellent job, actually, of looking after the city's financial health by a report he issued. We issued it in the middle of April, but it just got a little bit of coverage in August for some odd reason. The report was the financial aspect of New York City's laws related to marijuana. How the city would benefit from legalizing marijuana. And the numbers are rather astonishing. He predicts $400 million annually in revenue if we legalize marijuana. He also has the numbers on that it costs the city right now $31 million a year to deal with the arrests that are made in New York City, 37,000 of them a year for marijuana possession. So 37,000 marijuana possession arrests so far in 2013. The year isn't over yet. And $31 million in cost related to that could be saved if we legalized marijuana.
How do those number of arrests compare with the whole rest of the arrests in the country?
That's amazing. The state of New York actually arrests, marijuana arrests are I think around, no, I don't recall the number right now, but they're at more than 50,000 just marijuana possession arrests, but more arrests in New York State than in any other state in the country. You have to remember, New York State has 18 million population. California has 30 million. So we arrest more people with more marijuana arrests than California with half the population. So it's, well, everybody that knows anything about it knows that this is also a part of the stop and frisk program. Stop and frisk, 600,000 stop and frisks last year. And most of the arrests, I think 90% of the arrests that were made related to stop and frisk were marijuana possession.
Now, are you aware that as of 1977, New York State passed a law that it is not criminal to smoke marijuana in your own apartment.
I know that, of it.
So the criminalization of possession on the street is somewhat bizarre. If it's okay to smoke in your apartment, what is the big deal to have some in your pocket? It's like,
Well-
how do you get it to your apartment?
And the other piece of it is too, of course, that this is a violation of civil rights, because most of those arrests, the police in stop and frisk forced them to empty their pockets, and then said that the law
With
says
public
public view,
display.
public display. So if it's in your pocket and a policeman forces you to empty your pockets, what is that? Is it a sting, isn't it?
That is a sting, and there has been talk about it, but let's talk more generally. Okay, you identified a problem we have as a people, as a country, of a city, in which policemen are playing that game. That they want statistics of arrests. The people who run the prisons want more people to come in so they get more money per prisoner. They bribe judges to make longer sentences, whatever they call bribing the judges. They contribute to their campaigns. But there is pressure, economic pressure in our messed up system to profit off of the idea that people smoke marijuana. Now, yesterday, I videotaped the discussion that followed a showing of a movie over at Borough of Manhattan Community College called Neurons to Nirvana. And it was a systematic exploration, examination of the progress being made in conceptions, studies, medical studies of the psychedelics that had been demonized by the mainstream media. And in particular, in addition to cannabis, marijuana, in addition to that, they talked about LSD, psilocybin, and some new ones that people might not have heard about. One of them is called MDMA, although the street name now for that is called Molly. But people reported that with MDMA in a psychotherapeutic session, it is a marvelous tool for making amazing progress, that all the struggling that has gone on, the studying over so many years since Freud of what do, how do you talk to people, how do you get them to face their problems and deal with it and all that kind of stuff, that with MDMA adding to the picture, a chemical, that individuals suddenly have wonderful access to these problem areas in their thinking that they can discuss and deal with efficiently and solve the problem. It was such a wonderful thing to hear.
That takes me back to something well, it's good to hear that there's something new that will help therapeutically with psychological problems, but I go back to the first thing I read about about various kinds of mood-altering drugs by Andrew Weil.
Uh-huh.
And he makes the point in that, and it's that 10% of the population, of the world's population, wants to use mood-altering or mind-altering substances, and that it is simply a part of human nature, and he cites the fact that everybody has seen a 4-year-old spinning, or a bunch of 4-year-olds playing together, spinning around until they get dizzy and fall on the floor. Why are they doing that? Because they want to alter their minds. So if 10% of the world's population at any given time that we know of wants to alter their minds, the whole idea of making it illegal and a criminal has to be for some other reason than to protect them.
You know, in terms of the reason for the demonization of what we're talking about in the film, in fact, that's why I brought it up, and then I got distracted. I forgot what I was trying to get into. They have an actual tape recording of Richard Nixon talking about the drug policy motivation in his head to Haldeman. And there is actually language that blew my mind, that Nixon, I had heard other recordings, and there's one in a book called Smoke and Mirrors, which gives the underlying language between Nixon in the Oval Office with Ehrlichman and Haldeman, in which he says, now that we've got the presidency, we need an issue. How about a war on drugs? That way we can get the niggers and the youth that were giving us such a hard time with the war, and we won't have to call them niggers. We can just bust them on drugs. And what do you say? And Ehrlichman says, we got a problem, boss. That your predecessor appointed a committee of doctors to study it, and they're about to release their report, and they're saying that marijuana shouldn't be demonized, criminalized, and we should turn it loose.
Wow.
And Nixon says, well, I'll put some pressure on him. Maybe we'll have to get some other doctors. But in this one that I'm talking about last night, he goes further.
Mm-hmm.
He says the problem is, are you ready for this, Julie? The Jews. That it's Jewish psychotherapists and Jewish lawyers that are pushing, they're our enemies. Those goddamn Jews. And he uses strong language like that.
Wow. Yep.
It was like, hello. But I wanted to make this one point, as long as I got somebody to listen to here, that I was thinking of an open letter to the mayor, to the legislature, to the world, and in particular to the citizens of New York, that it should win in a court of law when someone is charged with any marijuana crime, selling it, using it, displaying it, that all the laws that make marijuana something that you should be ashamed to do out loud, that you should be ashamed to do in the street, that you should smoke in front of other people, that all that demonization is without basis, that it is an arbitrary demonization, and in particular the argument that should win in a court of law when there's a prosecution is that whatever law they're saying you broke, you demur, you don't plead to it. You say that law itself is unconstitutional and I'm not going to even honor it by pleading it, and I want to challenge that law as unconstitutional on this basis, that fundamental, constitutionally protected individual civil rights are involved. And I can list those rights. There are many, but the first one is freedom. And its proud oldest son is liberty. But freedom itself is a right to feel free. And liberty gives you a pretty good handle on what we're talking about when we say freedom, but one dimension in particular is freedom of thought. That if we're talking about smoking a cigarette that helps you think in a different way, is this way an alternative to reality? And if it is, what is reality? And there are two meanings in particular of reality here. There is the established meaning of reality from our commercially manipulated consensus, and there are other meanings of reality. There are philosophical meanings, there are personal meanings, and those realities we do indeed, as individuals, have a right to full respect, full dignity of our own individual perceptions of reality. And if marijuana, we feel, helps us to perceive realities that we consider valid, that indeed freedom of thought is one of the rights we're claiming is involved.
No, you're making great points, and they're absolutely valid. I'm quite sure legally, but the end of it is that, particularly in the case of marijuana and drugs, I don't believe that the purpose of making them illegal, which is relatively recent, it's in recent memory that happened, has anything to do with whether they're good for us or bad for us, whether they're freedom enhancing or not freedom enhancing. It had to do with isolating or selecting a population and using something to essentially imprison that population, plus scare the heck out of everybody else, as particularly people that don't want to alter their minds. It seems frightening to them. But but the other thing about it is that there are more incredibly obvious attacks on our freedom. How about the fact that in my lifetime I demonstrated I can just go over and over and over years when I demonstrated here and I demonstrated there and I did it on war and on this case and on that case. And you cannot demonstrate any longer in New York City because they have first of all, I have to get, if more than 12 people want to get together, we have to get permission from the police to do it. If we want to use the parks, we have to get permission from the Parks Department to do it. If we want to have a demonstration, we demonstrated against apartheid in South Africa 30 years ago, and at those demonstrations, 1 million people were out in the streets. Something happened. Eventually, apartheid was ended in South Africa.
So you have to submit to a walled-off area as your protest zone?
The whole east side of New York City around the UN, I don't know how many blocks, 20, 30, 40, 50 blocks.
I've shown videos of it.
Yeah,
It was beautiful.
and we walked to Central Park, and we had the Great Lawn, and we continued our demonstration there with
That was June 12th.
And in 1982, the anti-nuke ones, that anti-nuke weekend, and now you cannot, if you get to demonstrate someplace, they barricade you and then they close the street so nobody can see it.
So
People can't even walk down. So there are the kinds of things that are changing in our lifetime in terms of restrictions on our freedom. The whole idea of the fact that you can no longer essentially protest. A couple of months ago, I'm part of the Occupy Wall Street banking group. We had a demonstration action in front of HSBC's headquarters when they were having their annual stockholders meeting.
Okay.
And the reason we were demonstrating against them is that they had gotten off with some little slap on the wrist fine, despite the fact that they had, and it was all the evidence there, laundered hundreds of millions of dollars of illegal drug cartel money, right? And they got a little fine. It didn't even come close to what they cleaned profited in the thing. So we were
demonstrating. So like to pay 10% of what they scored.
So we made it public. We had our calling on people to come and join us out on Facebook and on the email and this and that and the other thing. And we probably had, 50, 60 people marching with signs, and the only actual press that was there was a fair amount of Japanese press, interesting,
RT,
German press, RT, yes, no American press. But the other piece of it was that I counted the patrol cars. Literally, there were 40 patrol cars. This was on Fifth Avenue.
Wow!
And then there were about as many cops there as there were in action. What does that tell you about don't you dare do this because we are going to? And what does it say about how much New York City administration and as a controller, I would certainly start getting out reports on that. How much is that costing?
Really?
To all those motorcycles, all those patrol cars, all those white shirts.
And
what did it cost?
Going for instead? What would that money could be?
Yes, and every single day, someplace or other, there's some of them get ignored. But what is it costing the city from a controller's point of view? My job would be to maintain the financial health of the city. I would start spending some of my budget money, letting people know what this attack on our liberties, which it is costing us. That the taxpayers are paying for it is pretty outrageous.
So, the word that comes to mind is police state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, is rule by fear.
Mm-hmm.
And the buzzword in use nowadays is called national security. Are you brave enough to consider whether 9/11 is a big fat lie?
It's not an issue of brave enough. What I have. It seems to me quite obvious that it was I won't say it was a put-up job. I'm trying to think of the language I want to use. Certainly, when I hear LIHOP and MIHOP, LIHOP means let it happen on purpose, and MIHOP made it happen on purpose. The day it happened, in fact, I was leaning towards LIHOP right that day it happened, and it was interesting for me in remembering that was the first time the Green Party had ballot status, or the party had ballot status at that time, and I was the Green Party's candidate for mayor.
Uh-huh.
And the primaries hadn't happened yet, so the mayor candidates weren't selected in the two major parties. But I was already the candidate, and I was actually getting invited into debates and things like that, which hasn't happened again, by the way. And primary day, I actually had a primary in New York City. Somebody was running, but a scam artist was running against me.
At least you had somebody to run against, so you
No, not fortunately. I didn't.
No?
No, he was a scammer.
Oh, really?
It wasn't a green. It was a complicated thing. Anyway, the point is, we were very busy here in this apartment where headquarters were because we had a primary.
Uh-huh.
And at 6 o'clock in the morning, we were already gathered here working on, and we were getting that news
Did he
when it
win
came
the
through.
primary?
No, I did.
Oh, thank God. But
Oh.
well, tell me more about him if you can.
Oh, no, well, I want to tell this story
Go
first,
ahead,
so
go
I
ahead,
can't, I can say something about him, but nothing much. Anyway, so,
You were
we
in
were
the
getting
apartment?
the news, but the apartment was just full of campaign helpers because we had to go rescue the campaign in polling places and things like that. Anyway, a few hours into what had happened, I get a phone call from my son who was in Amsterdam. And we were getting reports on the national news here that nobody knew what had happened. It was right after the plane hit and the buildings came down. No one had a clue yet, quote unquote. And my son gets through to me and he wants to know, are you okay? Right? Yes, I'm okay. And what's happening? And I say, nobody really knows. They said, what do you mean nobody really knows? It's on the news in Amsterdam that it was 4 hijacked planes from, this was before they were reporting any of that. I mean, so I said, when I got off the phone, I said, why is the government hiding from us that live here in the United States that kind of public information? And then afterward, think about it. Of course they knew that the planes were hijacked. How long did it take them to know they were hijacked planes? But they were telling us they had no clue. So it became, from my point of view, something's up, with all of this done. And my conclusion was, let it happen on purpose. And from what I have ever read since, I say, definitely let it happen. That you knew about it and you decided you'd... But I'm not comfortable with saying that I think that the buildings were destroyed by controlled demolition. And most of the discomfort has to do with the fact that I have no way of judging because I don't know enough about it, and I can't tell from anything I've read whether I can rely on the side that says yes, it was controlled demolition. I wonder if anybody has gathered together everybody's own story about this, because my brothers and my father, my grandfather, and most of my brothers were roofer waterproofers. Union, Local 8, New York City roofer waterproofers. And waterproofing means that you waterproof buildings. And my brother Pete was a waterproofer at the World Trade Center when it was being built.
Wow.
And what he told me about, within a week of it happening, and before there was a really much uproar about the thing, he said, I can't sleep. I keep thinking and thinking and thinking because I was waterproof when we were working on the World Trade Center. He said they were not meeting New York City code, and I couldn't figure out what they were doing. And I went to see the construction super and said, "What are you doing? You're not meeting New York City code, particularly about the elevators, and they have to be within a specific." And he said, "We're not meeting New York City code because we don't have to. It's the Port Authority, and they do not have to abide by New York City law." Certainly, anybody that says let it happen on purpose, I think, or believes it as I do, would say, yeah, that fits in with let it happen on purpose.
Let me tell you one more thing.
Because what was the outcome of 9/11? The outcome was we went to war, and we're still spending how many billions of dollars, every year, essentially. And how did it happen that we didn't go to, now we're off the topic, we didn't go to, I don't know how we were rescued from Syria.
Oh, yeah.
Unless it's going to
Fortunately.
happen again.
Putin, let's
What?
give Putin some credit. But, it's, to continue on this path here, that here we have a controller candidate, but still you're being exposed to Joe Friendly and his trip, and it's, I want to lay on you some of the facts that there is the economics of what we did to Iraq and so forth, but there is also the other dimensions, like as a mayor you have a broader thing than just the numbers, that in fact we have killed of the order of 1 million people over 9/11.
Yeah. Oh, Libya.
Yeah.
We went into Libya. Libya, free education through the university. Iraq, free education through the university, a highly educated population. Single-payer health care, everybody has it. How, isn't that interesting what they decide to destroy?
Well, the U.S. could still somehow manage to create a logic among its public relations gimmicks and all
Yes,
that.
and go out and wait, look what we're doing now. So they assassinate him.
Right.
And destroy his country. And the New York Times and the mainstream media takes that story and spins it as we have brought freedom to them, and on it goes, and it doesn't stop. Where is it going to stop? When will the American people wake up?
Now, if the people were to wake up, for example, again, you're saying on 9/11 you're being a little iffy, but let's assume that the American people came to realize that indeed there was a deliberate plan by the government, by Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz. Let's scare the hell out of American people with a false flag attack that we can blame on the Arabs, and that way we can begin a police state ruled by fear, make wars on the different people in the Middle East to get their oil. That is what happened. But I just want to add one more fact.
No, that's what let it happen on purpose.
But let me give you one more
Postulates.
fact. I'll give you one more fact.
Yeah.
On September 12th, 2000, 1 year before,
Mm-hmm.
the Port Authority made a request for bids for a contractor to do something in the building. Now, as far as what the contractor did in this contractual arrangement, what they claimed they were concerned with was asbestos floor tiles. That theoretically, the asbestos in the floor tiles was problematic, but what it did involve ultimately was spraying the flooring. In the year before 9/11, there was lots of spraying going on, and they were wondering why so much spraying. What is going on? But let's get back to that request for bids. The company who won the contest, their name was LVI, Services Incorporated. The owner of that company was Burton Freed, F-R-I-E-D. It was reported in Engineering News Review by Julie Rubin that they won the contract. And the kicker is that Christopher Boland, a reporter, went to Burton Freed and he said, "Could you explain to us what you agreed to do when you won this contract?" And he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Whereupon Christopher Boland went back to Julie Rubin of Engineering Review News, and he said that Burton Freed said he denied the whole thing. And she said, "No, when I talked to him, he explained the whole thing, that they had the contract, and it gave them the opportunity to travel throughout the building and do whatever was necessary to deal with the problem of the flooring." Now, the reason I mention that in particular is that I, with my own eyes, Julia, looked up online a few years ago, around '08, LVI Services Incorporated webpage. And I looked up, what is your business? You know, you can click on that. And you know what it said? Preparing buildings for controlled demolition.
So that's, well,
Virtually all the concrete flooring, which was 5-inch thick concrete, steel reinforced, but albeit, you know, too much sand and not
Yeah.
enough cement. But all of that concrete disappeared on 9/11. It turned into an incredibly fine dust, which a lot of New Yorkers breathed in.
and died from.
Because it was so fine that the body is not used to dealing with stuff that fine. It gets through the walls that we ordinarily put up for dust. This was powder, not dust. And the question is, I ask a lot of people, excuse me, but when you imagine a building coming down because the steel is sort of hurt by the plane hitting it, if that happened and one floor fell on top of another, what would happen to the concrete? It would be a stack of cards. There would be some crunching of one on top of the other, depending on how fast they hit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like boom. The buildings came down. You know, they both were burning for about an hour. But when they started coming down, each of them went from a whole building to no building in approximately 11 seconds. That is incredibly fast, Julia. For a building to go from 110 stories to 0 in 11 seconds, that's strange. But to go back to the concrete, there was a peer-reviewed journal article published in April of 2009 by a Danish guy called Niels Parrott, in which they published the results of examining very carefully the dust. They had 4 samples of dust that they submitted to all the tricks they knew, paper chromatography in particular. What were the components of the dust, and electron microscopy to examine all the deals. And what they found in all 4 samples was very high-tech, explosive, nanothermite that had been applied apparently by LVI Services Incorporated, sprayed underneath between the ceilings and the floors above them of this nanothermite, which would explain indeed how all the concrete turned to dust.
Well, I know that's great information that you provided. It makes me try and think to myself, well, we know the Project for New America said, and that's public, everybody knows Wolfowitz and the bunch that put it together, so we know that the thing was planned.
Well,
we know that they used the
What was their
9/11 to,
language?
what?
What was the language of Project American? They said we need a new Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then we
that's what I
can
mean.
use
We
that.
know it was planned. So why are the Julias of this world having trouble dealing with it? I guess just because it seems so incredibly complex and complicated and
Well, I guess the word
time
is cynical.
what?
It seems so cynical.
What?
The project seems so cynical that the government could be that turn against its people so completely. Or to put it another way, we're talking treason. 9/11 was treason.
Well, I mean, it's an ongoing thing. What is NASA? What Snowden? Listen, if we live in a country where now that they actually prevented Morales, the president of Ecuador, to fly because they
US.
wanted to capture Snowden.
Oh, right.
I mean, and why do they want to capture Snowden? Because they want everybody to know, don't you dare ever do this. They no doubt would torture him. I'm surprised they haven't assassinated him already, you know. But
I was awfully disappointed he didn't get the Nobel Prize.
wasn't it? Well, how about that? I mean, they gave Obama the Nobel Prize for what? What kind of a country are we living in?
A police state?
A police state, sure. It sure does resemble one.
Well, in
But
different
you know
dimensions.
what? We
Yeah.
were going to talk about the comptroller race. So
But the fact that you have run for mayor, it's like you can use controller talk to make the number case.
yeah,
But we're really talking about a police state and the Green Party as an alternative to the Republicans and the Democrats.
hmm
That's the thing. And you have candidates in the Green Party who are suffering the degeneracy of our times, that there is not a free debate goes on for the different positions, that if you're not a Democrat or Republican, you're not included in the public display of candidates.
Yeah.
You don't get to participate.
you know, well, and they sort of gloss it by putting up a structure so that, for instance, I, as controller, can't be in the public debate sponsored by the city, by our campaign finance board, because I haven't raised $50,000. I had to,
Wow.
yeah, so it,
You
there's,
can't
there's
be a
a,
serious candidate or
oh,
whatever the
otherwise I would have
category
raised that money.
That is bizarre.
You know, some of the bizarre things about it is, for instance, I could not get matching funds unless I raised $250,000.
So
And
in
the
other
city of
words-
New York was providing 6-to-1 match for anybody in the primary. Prior to the primary, anybody that was a candidate in a primary that raised, that's for the 3 citywide offices, $250,000, they would give a 6-to-1 match.
So what we're hearing from you is that an extra dimension to just the voting in the ballot box is people contributing numbers more than $100 out of their pocket toward the direction of $250 maximum. Now, how many people do I know who can fork out $250? So the people who came up with that law were already police state, evil, rotten, no good politicians. They were those Republican Democrats working together to squeeze out the third parties. And so it's just that police state corruption all over again.
The idea that I can't be in a debate because I haven't raised hundreds of thousands of dollars
Oh, yeah,
is madness. The other piece of it is, since I can't be I can't be in the debates, therefore I am not a candidate, or I had the experience of the Green Party candidate for governor and for public advocate were invited to an early forum during the primary season with the major party candidates. So when I saw the invitation, I emailed them and said, I'd like to be, I'm the controller candidate, I'm on the ballot, I would like to be in the debate. And I got an answer back that said, you're not invited. That's a quote. You're not invited. So these are social workers of America, sort of, or something like that. So I go to the forum, and there's our Green Party candidates are there. I go to support them and to argue, explain why I'm not invited, and yet the mayor candidate and the public advocate candidate are. And she said, well, nobody's running in your race. I said, I don't understand. What does that mean? At that point, the Democrat candidate did not have a primary challenge, Scott Stringer. So in other words, nobody
He was
was
invited, but that wasn't a problem with him.
well, he didn't come because
Oh.
he didn't have anybody running against him.
Oh, okay.
Quote unquote, I don't count. But the forum debate organizers just stand there and look and say, well, nobody's, in other words, you're not, they dismiss me. So I said, well, let me speak as long as I'm here. And he's not there, right? Why bother? Nobody's running. She said, well, that wouldn't be fair to him. So how's that for justification? It would not be fair to the unchallenged Democrat candidate that has decided not to bother to come to let you speak, even though he has decided not to bother to come. the system is so corrupt. May we use that word? Nevertheless, the other thing is I really, really like to,
But I just want to just
Yeah.
underline one
Sure.
main point you made. The only criteria should be whether you're on the ballot. If you're on the ballot, you're a contender, and money should not be an issue.
well, there's another, and you're absolutely correct about that one. We have, this election is going to be such an undemocratic mess. And what has happened is, instead of the normal ballot, each party has a line. You know, that's what I say. And you vote the party line, you vote for all the candidates that are on the party, that's standard procedure. So we used to have line F. Now they have this time eliminated the line numbers and eliminated and put other candidates right under you. It's a total mess because of all these extra candidates, and only the Democrats and the Republicans have their own independent line. As a Green, I'm here, and then below me is on the same line as some other party, and below it's
A challenge to even find the different candidates.
yes, and in addition to that, because they're all squeezed on one page, you know, what fonts 6 point.
Oh my God.
You can't see any.
9 is small enough.
Nine is barely readable, and
Right.
it's 6.
Wow.
So Democrat and Republican candidate,
So
no
that's
problem.
more
They're
of
appearing
corruption,
in
police
3 or
state,
4
yeah.
4 different places and
Wow.
on their own independent lines with nothing in between. So, and what this also means is somebody's looking for Julie Willebrand, and because of all this tiny print and everything, they make a mistake and they fill
Check
in
off
two categories because it's an optical ballot. If they make a mistake and fill in 2 categories for the same office, and there are multiple offices on this thing, their whole ballot is invalid. So this thing is
my.
it's outrageous. The way the New York State Legislature works, the Assembly is Democrat, the Senate is Republican, and they can all merrily pass bills that they know are not going to pass, that will please their voters, and one side or the other side will vote it down. But they'll work together to get the bills passed that their funders want.
Wow. Well, I applaud that you have the moral conscience to keep going, buddy.
Thank you.
I feel like it hurts, like it's pain to suffer the reality that after all that fighting, you're probably going to lose because you're up against a stacked deck.
Well, I mean, I think personally, I think, well, okay, not in my time, but doesn't make a difference. Can't not do it.
You do get these ideas heard some.
Right, you get them heard, and people are surprised, and I particularly like these controller things because it's easy for people to dismiss moral, principled, reasoned arguments, but it's harder for them to dismiss money arguments. So I like the controller thing because I like being able to talk about pot not as a moral freedom issue, but as a money issue, because over the years of doing this, it's always kind of surprising. People look, huh? What? You know, they're stunned when they actually hear some details about it. One of the things in this campaign that I'm promoting, it's the first one, is a public bank. No, there it is, right there. Yeah, this one, the very first platform item is establishing a municipal bank. When I started looking at the budget once years ago and said, our budget is a $70 billion a year budget. That means we are collecting in taxes and sending out in expenditures $70 billion. Every penny of it is going through commercial banks. Every penny of it, there's no such thing as a bank not taking a rake off from anything. So if we had a municipal bank, it would all get funneled in and out, and that rake off, and I don't, if I'm the controller, I will certainly do the work to find out exactly how much is that costing us, but 70 billion is 70,000 million. Now, out of 70,000, 100, 200, 500 million, that's a little nothing. So assuming the bank is taking just a small rake off, we're talking a half a
Serious
billion.
money.
We're talking some very serious money that will do a lot to hire teachers, pay for schools, do all kinds of
Not to
things.
mention other advantages to the government, to the policies of the institution being pro-public rather than anti-public.
Yeah. Presumably, all banks can create money. There's no reason why New York City's bank can't create money. Meaning, if we need money for development purposes, we don't have to go out and borrow it through Citibank or Chase or whatever. We can create it ourselves, which that in and of itself is an incredible benefit. And the state of North Dakota is the only state in the country that has a public bank, and the state of North Dakota is the only state in the country that doesn't have a deficit. So, I mean, things like that one can talk to people in ordinary language and they can understand it, but nobody's talking to them about it. So it isn't necessarily an idea that will pop into your head, oh, why don't we have our own bank? But it is one of my major platforms. And another one is to have city accounting on subsidies, the kinds of subsidies that we are handing out endlessly. A perfect example is Barclays Bank has produced a stadium that we, the taxpayers, essentially paid for out in Brooklyn in a major neighborhood flat. Nobody wanted it there. The people were absolutely opposed to it. So essentially, we gave Barclays Bank a $300 million present. Every single practically line that goes through Brooklyn goes through Atlantic Avenue Station. The MTA gave Barclays naming rights for that station. And a couple million travelers come through that station every single day, and they see Barclays. Now, advertising is paid for by you pay a rate dependent on how many eyes see your ad, right? So the MTA handed to Barclays 2 million riders' eyes, because when you come through the station, what do you see? Barclays. And they did that for $200,000 a year.
Oh.
It's nothing.
Right.
It's a tenth of a penny per eye, as opposed, it's madness to have handed them here. We'll put your name on.
Now, was Loco part of that?
Yes, yes, he was. So, and this is the kind of thing that controllers pay attention to. The controllers can talk about. Most people don't even know that there is a controller.